You ever get fired, not because you did something wrong, but because you weren't smiley enough? Yeah, that happened to me. And 2 years later, I bought the company that let me go. My name's Jenna Hartley. I'm 31 now, and I run a tech startup based out of Austin, Texas. But back in early 2022, I was just another project manager trying to keep my head down, do good work, and not drown in group chats and Slack pings. I wasn't loud. Didn't flirt with higher-ups. I didn't overshare on LinkedIn. I just did my job. Well, might I add, until one day, that apparently stopped being enough. I was 29 at the time, working at Brightwave Solutions, a mid-sized tech firm, with decent coffee and terrible leadership. I'd led 6 client projects in the last year all on time, all under budget. I'd earned a reputation for being the person who could take chaos, slap it into a spreadsheet, and get the team over the finish line. But I wasn't exactly Miss Congeniality, and that, as I learned, was a problem. One Thursday, during my quarterly review, my manager, Steve Madsen, a guy who thought synergy was a personality trait, leaned back in his chair, folded his hands behind his head like he was about to deliver life-changing wisdom, and said, "You're competent, Jenna, but your attitude, you could smile more. People find you hard to approach." I actually paused, physically froze. Not because I didn't hear him, but because I needed a second to process whether I'd just time-traveled back to 1950. Was this guy seriously suggesting I needed to grin more to keep my job? I looked at him, this middle-aged man who once printed memes on PowerPoint slides like they were revolutionary, and I said, as calmly as I could, I wasn't aware being approachable was more important than delivering 6 successful projects back to back. He gave me that tight, corporate smiley kind that screams, "Careful now." Then he nodded and scribbled something onto his notes. I didn't know it at the time, but he'd already decided I was a liability. Over the next 2 weeks, things got weird. My meeting invites disappeared. My access to certain internal tools was being reviewed. People stopped asking me to weigh in on key decisions. And then, on a quiet Wednesday afternoon, I got the email. The subject line said, "Quick HR sync." You know the one. The kind that hits your gut before your eyes even read it. I walked into that Zoom call already knowing what was coming, but the phrasing still managed to sting. "We regret to inform you that due to cultural misalignment, we're ending your employment effective immediately." No severance. No warning. Just a smiling HR rep reading off a script like she was announcing the weather. Cultural misalignment. That was the phrase they used. What they really meant was, you made us uncomfortable by not performing emotional labor on top of actual labor. That night, I sat in my car for 40 minutes outside my apartment, just gripping the steering wheel, not crying, not even thinking clearly, just feeling that burning kind of anger you get when you realize people don't care how good you are care how good you make them feel. And apparently, I didn't make Steve feel like a star. I went inside, opened my laptop, and rage wrote a list in my notes app. Every inefficiency at Brightwave, every ignored user complaint, every time they gaslit junior employees into working overtime for the team. And at the bottom, I wrote, "If I ever run a company, we'll bury them." I wasn't being dramatic. I was just done being disposable. Done being told to soften my voice, play nice, and pretend to be grateful for mediocrity wrapped in tech bro buzzwords. Looking back, getting fired that day might have been the best thing that ever happened to me. But I didn't know that yet. All I knew was I'd just lost my job for not smiling enough. And someday, if I ever got the chance, I was going to make damn sure that company regretted it. I was humiliated. That's the only word for it. No warning, no write-up, no conversation about improvenchist, an HR woman I barely knew, wearing way too much blush and reading off a script like she was doing me a favor. She smiled the entire time, like this was just routine. She slid a templated exit form across the desk, avoided eye contact, and said, "We wish you the best in your future endeavors." I didn't even get a cardboard box. Just 30 minutes to pack up my stuff, delete my Slack, and be gone. I walked out of Brightwave feeling like I'd been erased. Like none of it mattered me hours. My loyalty, my weekends spent fixing other people's messes. And the worst part? No one even looked surprised. It was like they'd all seen it coming but didn't have the spine to say a thing. I sat in my car. For a long time, at first I just stared out the windshield, trying to process what had just happened. Then the tears came, ugly, angry tears. Not because I couldn't get another job. I'm not helpless. I've got degrees, experience, a damn solid track record. But that wasn't the point. It felt like I'd given pieces of myself to that place, only to be tossed out like a printer that ran out of ink. I cried, not out of fear, but out of sheer exhaustion. Best the system was rigged, and I'd played by all the rules anyway. That night, I didn't talk to anyone. I didn't text my mom or my best friend. I didn't post anything vague on social media. I just pulled a $7 bottle of Pinot Noir out of the fridge, poured it into a chipped mug, and curled up on my couch with my laptop. I opened a blank note and started typing. At first, it was just bullet points. Problems I'd noticed for months. Brightwave's clunky backend, the outdated interface no one ever updated. How they consistently ignored client feedback and still had the nerve to call themselves user-focused. I typed furiously, fueled by wine and rage, and something deeper. I didn't realize how long the list had gotten until the screen started to blur and I had to blink the tears away. I kept writing. I wrote about how women at Brightwave were always expected to manage the vibe. As if our facial expressions were more important than our output. I wrote about the ideas I'd pitched in meetings that Steve had dismissed silently, to pitch them again a month later as if they were his. I wrote about the juniors who were scared to ask questions, the interns who were underpaid and overworked, and the endless, pointless meetings that wasted everyone's time. It wasn't a plan. It wasn't revenge. It was documentation. Evidence, a snapshot of a broken system from someone who'd lived inside it for too long. And then, at the bottom of that note, I wrote a single sentence, just one. I didn't even think twice. I just typed it, read it once, and closed the laptop. If I ever run a company, we'll bury them. It wasn't a threat, it was a promise. A quiet declaration to myself that this moment, this exact feeling, that mix of fury and shame and determination would not go to waste. I wasn't going to forget what it felt like to be disposable. I wasn't going to shrug it off and move on like so many of my friends had been forced to. I was going to remember every fake smile, every useless team-building exercise, every ignored red flag, and if I ever got the chance, I was going to build something better, not just out of ambition, but out of spite, out of proof that they were wrong. That I was never too cold, too serious, too unapproachable. I was just in the wrong room. That night didn't change everything right away. I still had rent due. I still had to figure out health insurance. I still spent the next few weeks applying for gigs and wondering if I should just settle for another job where I'd smile more and speak less. But something had shifted inside me. That seed of anger had been planted. And I wasn't going to let it die. Not this time. Not again, because if there's one thing I've learned about anger, it's fuel. And if you burn it slow and steady, it can take you places you never imagined. 2022 was a dumpster fire. Until it wasn't. After getting fired in February, I drifted through spring like I was on autopilot freelong, picking up short-term project management gigs, doing QA for an old college friend's SaaS product, whatever, paid the bills. I ate a lot of frozen Trader Joe's meals and spent most evenings cross-legged on my living room floor with my laptop, surrounded by half-drunk coffee cups and notebooks full of sketches. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't stable. But it was quiet. And in that quiet, I started building something. Not out of revenge. Not yet. At first, it was just survival. But survival can be a seed. You water it with time, and suddenly it starts to look like ambition again. By late summer, something finally clicked. I reconnected with Lena Cho, a former Brightwave engineer and one of the smartest back-end devs I'd ever worked with. Lena had left 6 months before May, burned out, underpaid, and completely done with corporate chaos. We grabbed coffee in August at a tiny cafe off 5th and Congress, and within 30 minutes of catching up, we were sketching ideas on a napkin. What if workflow tools weren't bloated and annoying? What if project management software actually worked for the teams using it, instead of making them feel like they were drowning in dashboards? By the end of that conversation, we weren't just venting, we were building. That's how Taskment was born. Taskment wasn't flashy. It didn't promise to change the world. It promised to do one thing well: reduce project clutter using lean, AI-powered task sorting. That's it. No team synergy, gamification, no endless notification loops, just smart sorting, clean tracking, and actual automation that didn't require a week-long onboarding course. Lena and I worked out of my apartment. We coded through the holidays. We tested with friends. We argued about button placement. We laughed at our terrible logo. It was scrappy, it was messy, but it was ours. And in March 2023, we launched the beta. We had no money for marketing, just a landing page, a few cold emails, and some goodwill from tech friends who still liked us. But within a month, we had 40 beta testers. By the end of April, 2 of them asked if they could pay us to keep using it. That's when it hit me: we weren't building a portfolio piece. We were running a real business. Our first paying client came in May, a small UX consultancy in Portland that paid us $79 a month. Then came a remote dev team out of Pittsburgh. Then a startup incubator in Seattle. By June, we had our third paying client. It wasn't life-changing money, but it was proof. By September 2023, we had 17 paying users and enough monthly, recurring revenue to cover rent for both of us. That's when the investor calls started. Quiet ones. Warm intros from people who'd heard about this clean little PM tool that's actually usable. We weren't chasing VC money, but one offer stood out: a pre-seed deal for $400,000. From an angel syndicate in New York who believed in lean, operator-led tools and didn't expect us to grow at suicidal speed. We said yes. And just like that, Taskment was no longer an idea. It was a company. Looking back, I still don't know what shocked me more: how fast things started to move, or how natural it felt once they did. Don't get me wrong, Lena and I were still eating ramen 3 nights a week and answering support emails at 2 a.m. We were still duct taping systems together and manually onboarding every single client. But there was momentum. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't just surviving someone else's bad leadership. I was making decisions, steering the ship, building a workplace that didn't treat burnout like a badge of honor. And yeah, part of me kept thinking about Brightwave, about Steve, about that stupid review where I was told to smile more. I wondered if they knew what I was doing, if they'd heard that the woman they discarded like an empty coffee cup was now CEO of something that was quietly picking up speed. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. I wasn't chasing them. I was building something better. But I'd be lying if I said it didn't feel good knowing I was finally outpacing the people who once made me feel small. The truth is, when you get tossed aside, you've got 2 choices. You can spend the rest of your life waiting for someone to give you a seat again, or you can build your own damn table. By the end of 2023, Taskment had 11 team members, including 2 engineers we hired straight out of companies just like Brightwave. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel angry anymore. I felt ready, because I knew what was coming. And in 2024, I wasn't just going to grow Taskment, I was going to take it full circle. By early 2024, something strange started happening. Lena and I noticed small changes in our back-end traffic. A few user sessions were logging in from company IPs that looked oddly familiar. At first, we brushed it off. Earliest-stage tools always attract curious eyes, but when one of those users filled out a feedback form using an alias that sounded suspiciously close to Maverick, my stomach turned. Brightwave. I didn't have hard proof, but I didn't need it. I knew that writing style, that passive tone. They were sniffing around, maybe even A/B testing us internally. It shouldn't have surprised me. After all, Taskmint was quietly doing what they'd failed to do for years: fix broken workflow systems without over-engineering everything. We were clean, fast, and, most importantly, we listened. Something Steve had never mastered. The irony was delicious. They'd once told me my ideas were idealistic, too user-friendly, even naive. Steve literally said that. He believed in complexity for the sake of control. That was his entire product philosophy: keep clients so tangled in features and dependencies that they'd never leave. We believed the opposite. We built clarity, not control. And now, those same clients were quietly migrating. One of the enterprise consulting firm I used to handle accounts for cut their Brightwave license by 40% in February and moved their senior teams to Taskmint. I didn't say a word. I just watched the numbers, smiled to myself, and reinvested their first $7,800 invoice directly into hiring a new UX designer. The best part, Steve had no idea I was behind it. Our brand was intentionally clean. No About Us section with photos. No founder bios splashed on the homepage. Just the product. I had erased myself from the surface so he wouldn't see me coming. And, from everything I heard through mutual connections, Steve still ran Brightwave like it was a frat house: allowed, dismissive, allergic to feedback. He hadn't changed. That company still burned through junior hires and ignored exit interviews. They kept promoting charisma over competence. The house of cards was still standing, but I could see the cracks from miles away. Then came the moment that caught me completely off guard. I was digging through some old files, clearing out my inbox, cleaning up my digital life, and I found it. My HR termination email. The one they sent me in February 2022. The subject line was cold, robotic. Your exit process and next steps. I opened it and scrolled, heart wearily still. There it was. The final sentence, probably copy-pasted from every exit they'd ever handled. We wish you all the best in your future endeavors. I sat there in silence, reading that line over and over again, then I laughed. Not a big laugh, just a quiet one. I whispered to myself, without even thinking, thanks, I'm doing great. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not out of anxiety, but because the past was finally catching up to the present. I kept replaying those last weeks at Brightwave in my head. The cold shoulders. The weird meetings. The way people started avoiding eye contact like I had some contagious failure. I remembered sitting in the break room, waiting for water to boil. Hearing Steve behind me joking that I was the office ghost. Back then, I'd smiled and said nothing. I'd kept it together. Now I was the ghost haunting their user analytics, haunting their roadmap, slowly chipping away at their relevance one client at a time. I didn't want revenge for the sake of revenge, but I did want closure. I wanted the kind of closure you can only get from success, the kind that doesn't scream or gloat, but quietly proves everyone wrong. And the universe must have heard me, because a week later, I got a DM on LinkedIn. It was from an old coworker, Jamie, one of the few people at Brightwave I actually respected. She'd left too. Said she couldn't deal with the culture anymore. But her message made my heart stop. Hey, random question. Is Taskmint your thing? Because people at Brightwave are talking. Steve thinks some ex-staffers behind it, and he's freaking out. They just lost another $40,000 contract this week. Thought you'd enjoy the tea. I stared at that message for a long time. $40,000. That was real. That wasn't petty anymore. That was impact. And Steve was finally noticing. I didn't reply to Jamie. I just smiled, got up from my desk, and poured myself a cup of coffee. Not champagne. Not anything dramatic. Just a calm cup of dark roast in my favorite mug. Because I wasn't done yet. Not even close. Brightwave had spent years burning people out and calling it industry pressure. I wasn't here to play nice anymore. I was here to outbuild them, outlast them. And if I played it right, I was going to do more than that. I was going to buy the company. By December 2023, Taskmint was profitable. Not just breaking even profitable. We had just crossed $900,000 in annual recurring revenue. 17 active enterprise accounts, 12 full-time staff, a designer in Chicago, 2 remote engineers in Austin, and a part-time ops manager who kept our chaos from spilling everywhere. Our churn rate was under 3%, and customer feedback consistently glowing. We weren't loud, but we were steady, growing, and more importantly, we were quietly eroding the customer base of one very particular company. Then, one cold Monday morning, as I sipped coffee and checked emails like I always did, I saw it. A message from someone I hadn't thought about in years. Subject line, Taskmint Partnership Inquiry. Sender, Richard Vaughn, CEO of Brightwave. I read the email 3 times. The wording was stiff, formal, like someone trying to sound casual but clearly holding back nerves. He said he'd heard about our product through multiple mutual clients, and was impressed with our traction in the enterprise productivity space. Then came the kicker. Would you be open to a potential partnership or strategic acquisition discussion? I just sat there, frozen for a second, staring at my screen. He didn't know who I was. He didn't recognize the name. To him, I was just the founder of the startup that had been quietly bleeding their accounts dry for 9 straight months. But to me, he was the executive who stood by while Steve Maverick pushed me out of my job for not being team-facing enough. Now he was in my inbox, asking for a meeting. I called Lena into my office and slid the laptop across the desk. She read the message, blinked twice, then just started laughing. "No way," she said. "That's your old company." "That's him." I nodded. "Yup." She sat down, still smiling. "Well, damn. Guess they finally felt the burn." I thought, for a minute, part of me wanted to ignore it. Block the domain. Never reply. But the smarter part of me knew better. You don't walk away when the people who doubted you come knocking. You let them walk through the door and see exactly who you've become. I replied later that day. "Happy to discuss. Let's set a time." We booked the call for the following Thursday just after lunch. Perfect timing. I wore a black blazer, nothing fancy, but clean, sharp. I kept my background neutral. No signs, no branding, no trophies. Just me, calm and quiet. Logged into the Zoom 5 minutes early. When the Brightwave team joined, it was like watching ghosts appear through fog. Richard Vaughn looked older than I remembered, thinner hair, deeper lines around his eyes, but still carrying that same air of quiet arrogance. He was joined by their new VP of product and a junior strategy analyst, who looked like she hadn't slept in 3 days. I introduced myself as Jenna Malone, co-founder and CEO of Taskmint. Richard nodded, didn't blink. "Nice to meet you, ma'am." "Thanks for making time, ma'am." That word stuck in my brain for a second longer than it should have. I smiled. "Of course. I'm curious what you have in mind." The next 30 minutes were exactly what I expected: carefully scripted compliments, vague language about synergy and possible alignment, thinly veiled attempts to gauge our valuation. They were circling, nervous, but hopeful. Richard danced around the acquisition question until the very end. That's when he finally said it outright. "If you're open to it, we'd love to explore what a strategic buyout could look like. Taskmint clearly has momentum, and I think there's a world where we help each other grow." I nodded politely. I gave them nothing, no commitment, no emotion, just said we'd take it under consideration and follow up next week. But the moment I closed the call, I stared at my screen and whispered, "You have no idea, do you?" Because the irony was so thick I could taste it. Brightwave had once fired me with the same bland HR language they probably used to fire dozens of people just like me. I'd been disposable, forgettable, a culture mismatch. Now, less than 2 years later, I was sitting across from the CEO, and he was calling me ma'am, like I was royalty, like I held the cards. Because I did. And it wasn't just about revenge anymore, it was about legacy. About building something real, something bigger than the place that once made me feel so small. They wanted to buy what they couldn't build, and they had no idea they were trying to buy it from the woman they discarded. I didn't reply to their follow-up right away. I let them sweat. Meanwhile, Lena and I scheduled a quiet meeting with our board advisor and our lawyer. We weren't just going to entertain this offer. We were going to leverage it. Because if Brightwave wanted Taskmint, it meant they were finally afraid. Afraid of how fast we were growing. Afraid of losing their last real differentiators. Afraid of a ghost they didn't realize had a name. And a plan. I didn't want a partner. I didn't want their name on my cap table. I wanted control. Full stop. And by the end of Q1 2024, I was going to get it. In January 2024, I walked into Brightwave's offices as an employee, but as a buyer, they had no idea. Steve drifted past me in the lobby, eyes glued to his phone, and never even twitched with recognition. I'd chosen a muted blazer, on purpose, same no-nonsense ponytail, same neutral face. The only difference was the folder of term sheets in my bag, and the quiet confidence of someone who owned the meeting before it began. Their receptionist gave me a guest badge. I pinned it on and took the very elevator I used to sob in 2 years earlier. The place felt smaller, dimmer. Half the desks were empty, sticky notes curling on abandoned monitors. I could almost taste the churn ex-employees, ex-clients, ex-motivation. A stray conversation floated down the hall, someone griping about another renewal lost. I smiled under my breath. When I reached the boardroom, Richard Vaughn rose to greet me with that executive half-smile reserved for people he hopes to impress. "Jenna, welcome. Coffee, still prefer dark roast." He thought the personal touch would soften me. It didn't. I sat, opened my laptop, and pulled up the numbers he'd emailed. Revenue down 31% year-over-year. Support tickets up. Glassdoor reviews brutal. Richard launched into a polished speech about culture and legacy, name-dropping clients who were still loyal and highlighting the institutional knowledge Brightwave supposedly carried. I let him finish, nodding like a polite stranger at a bus stop. Then I clicked to my slide. Churn rate plotted against time. The curve looked like a ski slope. "This trend," I said, tapping the graph, "suggests your legacy is hemorrhaging." I watched the color drain from his face, while the junior analyst stared at her notes like they might save her. Steve slipped into a seat near the back, finally aware of who I was. He opened his mouth, closed it, and stared at the table. We moved to valuation. Richard floated a number, something north of 10 million, dressed up with words like goodwill and brand equity. I countered with a different picture: aging tech stack, 2 major clients already piloting Taskmint, and a staff morale index so low HR had started offering meditation apps instead of raises. My first figure was $2.3 million, asset only, no assumption of debt, all IP transferred within 30 days. Silence thickened the room. Richard cleared his throat, tried to recover. Steve whispered something about underselling the vision, but no one took the bait. I leaned back, folded my hands, and asked the question I'd been saving. "Richard, how do you assess cultural fit these days? Still based on who smiles the most?" Steve flinched hard enough to bump the conference phone. Richard's eyes flicked to him, then back to me. "We've evolved," he said. "We value measurable engagement now." I raised an eyebrow. "Good, because my engagement metric is profitability." The junior analyst stifled what sounded like a nervous laugh. I pretended not to notice. We broke for 10 minutes so they could discuss. Internally, I stood by the window overlooking downtown Austin, remembering the girl who once stared out of this same glass, wondering if she'd ever feel whole again. Now I felt sharp, steady, surgical. Lena texted, "Everything smooth." I replied with a single word: bleeding. She sent back a skull emoji and a champagne bottle. That about summed it up. When they returned, Richard tried a softer tack: turnouts, advisory roles, a promise to honor the spirit of Brightwave. I listened, then slid my final term sheet across the table. Same price, shorter timeline, severance guarantees for rank-and-file staff, 0 guarantees for management. "This is take it or leave it," I said plainly. "The longer you wait, the lower the offer goes. Your clients are already calling us." Steve's jaw clenched. Richard's shoulders sagged an inch. He asked for 48 hours. I gave him 24. I left the building the way I came, calm, unhurried, invisible to most. The badge printer jammed as the receptionist tried to collect my visitor tag. I told her to keep it. Walking to my car, I felt the weight of 2 years lift like fog at sunrise. They still thought they were negotiating with a competitor. They hadn't realized they were bargaining with a memory they tried to delete. By the time I hit I-35, Richard's email pinged my phone. Jenna, we're prepared to accept your terms pending board approval. I merged into traffic, turned up the radio, and let the grin spread across my face. The long game was almost over, and I'd never once had to raise my voice or my smile. They were desperate. I wasn't. You could feel it in every call, every follow-up email, every nervous shift in their boardroom seats. They tried to make it feel mutual, like we were collaborating toward a shared vision. But it wasn't mutual. Brightwave was circling the drain, and I was the only one tossing them a lifeline, not out of mercy, but because I knew exactly what I wanted, and I wanted it clean. No legacy staff, no cultural baggage, no overlapping egos. I offered $2.3 million. Acetinely, no employment guarantees, no assumption of debt, just enough to make Richard's exit deck look decent, like he landed the plane before it exploded. The lawyers moved fast. Lena's contacts pulled together a full review of Brightwave's IP, patents, client contracts, codebase, and financials. Within 10 days, our outside counsel, a sharp former litigator named Maya Singh, flagged a few red lines in their liabilities. I told her to cut them out. We didn't need their old lawsuits, we needed their back-end integrations, their pipeline, data, and their few remaining software licenses that still held value. We were carving the meat off the bone. Richard's lawyers blinked at first, tried to negotiate an equity retention and executive bonuses. I gave them a polite no. We weren't interested in symbolism. Just the pieces that worked. Within 3 weeks, they folded. I signed the final doc on a Thursday morning in March 2024. It was raining. The kind of soft drizzle that makes everything feel quieter than it really is. Lena brought in coffees. Maya called in from San Francisco, walking me through each section of the closing document. I initialed page after page with calm precision, like clocking in for something I'd already won in my head a year ago. When I reached the final signature block, my name across from Richard Vaughn's, I paused for a moment, not because I doubted it, but because it felt like drawing a final line under the part of my life that started in a conference room with someone telling me I didn't smile enough. After we signed, Richard asked if I'd like to make a brief appearance for the remaining Brightwave staff. Just to close the loop. I declined. Politely. I didn't need to see the look on Steve's face or shake hands with the ghost of the company that fired me. I walked out of that building with one clear thought in my mind. I wasn't too serious. They were too fragile. And that fragility had cost them everything: trust, talent, momentum. The very things they once dismissed in me were the things I used to beat them. Back at the Taskment office, the team was buzzing. Lena popped a bottle of champagne. "We bought them," she said, grinning like a kid. "You actually bought them?" I nodded. "We bought the name. We buried the noise. We didn't announce the acquisition publicly, not right away. We let it leak quietly, through former Brightwave clients who started receiving onboarding invites from Taskment's customer success team. No press release, no victory lap. Just progress. Real, steady, undeniable growth. That was the difference. They had cared about image. I cared about structure. Over the next few weeks, we stripped the codebase for parts, merged what was salvageable, migrated key accounts, terminated expired vendor contracts, and archived thousands of internal documents that read like a case study in slow-motion collapse. Every petty memo, every redundant workflow, every performance review template that emphasized team spirit over output. It was a museum of mediocrity. I let Lena lead the internal integration. She brought her usual sharpness, pruning what didn't scale, preserving what could serve us. By May, Taskment was leaner, faster, and had doubled our enterprise leads. But there was something else, to a shift in me. I wasn't angry anymore. Not in the way I had been. The fire was still there, sure, but it had cooled into something sharper, more focused. Revenge had gotten me to the door, but strategy was what got me through it. And now that I was inside, the question wasn't how to punish the people who pushed me out. It was how to build something so unshakably strong that no one could ever question whether I belonged. A week after the deal closed, I got a short email from an unknown address. The subject line read, "Saw the news." The message was just 5 words. "Guess you smiled after all." No signature. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. The smile wasn't for them, it was for me. And it didn't look like theirs. It looked like control. Let me know when you're ready for part 8. We weren't even done yet. Where the story begins to shift from revenge to expansion, and Jenna faces a new kind of power. First order of business. I fired Steve. Not dramatically. No raised voices, no slammed doors. Just a quiet calendar invite on a Tuesday morning titled Transition Review, and a folder of documentation. Lena and I had been curating since the first acquisition talk. He walked in with his usual smirk, probably thinking he was going to be named VP of something. I greeted him politely, asked him to sit, and handed him the papers. "We appreciate your years here, but your role isn't part of the forward structure," I said. He didn't argue. Not really. Just blinked a few times, said, "Okay," and walked out slower than he came in. I thought I might feel triumphant watching him leave, but I didn't. I just felt done. Like closing a tab you didn't need open anymore. Lena watched from her desk as he passed by. She didn't say anything, but her fingers stilled on her keyboard. Until the door clicked shut. She looked at me and gave a single nod. That was enough. Steve had been the face of everything wrong with Brightwave's old culture. A manager who led with charm and fear in equal measure. The kind of guy who threw others under the bus when it suited him, then smiled during the next team photo. He'd gotten comfortable with the idea that no one would ever hold him accountable. And for years, he'd been right. But not anymore. Next came the announcement. We held a full team call with Brightwave's remaining staff and Taskment's core leadership. No jargon, no vague rebranding buzzwords. I told them plainly, Taskment would be the future. Brightwave's tech stack would be sited there. Clients would be migrated within 6 months. There would be roles available for those who were adaptable, coachable, and genuinely committed to building something better. A few people looked stunned. A few smiled like they'd been waiting for this. And a few just logged off after the call and never came back. That was fine. We weren't here to rescue a legacy. We were here to build a standard. I let Lena lead the integration plan. She worked like a surgeon, clear, precise, no wasted motion. We audited every system, mapped every workflow, and evaluated every employee for skill and culture fit. No more toxic charmers. No more middle managers playing politics instead of driving results. I personally reviewed the performance of every department head still on payroll. One by one, I called them in. Some left quietly. Some argued, but not a single one of them asked me to smile. Progress, the energy started to shift. Former Brightwave engineers, the ones who'd survived under layers of red tape and mismanagement, started to open up. One woman, Clara, told me she hadn't had a one-on-one with leadership in over a year. Another, Luis, said his favorite project had been shelved because Steve didn't understand it. I told him to pull it back up. We gave him 2 weeks to build a prototype inside Taskment's architecture. It blew everyone away. He cried in the hallway after the demo. Said it was the first time in years someone actually believed in his work. That moment stayed with me. On the client side, the transition was faster than anyone predicted. Once they saw how seamless Taskment's platform was, how responsive our team was, how clean the reporting dashboards looked, they didn't hesitate. One Fortune 500 VP even sent me a thank you email that ended with, "We always wanted to leave Brightwave, but we didn't know where to go. Now we do." That was the quiet kind of validation I craved. not applause, just confirmation that we were building something that actually solved problems. We repainted the walls, replaced the furniture, removed every last artifact of the old era down to the fake plants and broken espresso machine. We made the space feel new again, not just for optics, but because people need physical proof that change is real. I put up a simple sign near the entrance: do good work, respect people. No fake smiles required. It wasn't a mission statement. It was a reminder. By the end of May, we had fully absorbed Brightwave's assets. The company name was officially retired. What was left was Taskmint cleaner, sharper, faster, and more alive than it had ever been. And me, standing in the center of it all, not as someone they could dismiss, but as the woman who made every single call. No one told me to smile anymore. I didn't need to. I had something better: authority, vision, and a team that didn't mistake silence for weakness. We weren't just moving forward. We were rewriting the rules entirely. People ask if I bought Brightwave for revenge. I get it, the story practically writes itself. Fired in 2022 for not smiling enough. Come back 2 years later and buy the company for $2.3 million. On paper, it sounds like a revenge arc. But the truth is more nuanced. I didn't build Taskmint to get even. I built it because I saw a need, and because I knew I could. Brightwave just happened to be the company standing in the way. When the moment came, I didn't hesitate, not because I wanted to humiliate them, but because I was ready. And they weren't. They were vulnerable, bloated, and coasting on outdated systems and fragile egos. I didn't burn them down. They were already crumbling. I just walked through the front door and took the deed. That said, I won't pretend it wasn't satisfying. There's a special kind of peace in walking the same hallways that once dismissed you, only now you're holding the keys. Same office layout, same bland wall art, same flickering lights in the break room, but everything feels different. The power dynamic, the energy, the silence when people look at you and realize you're the one making the calls now. It's not about rubbing it in, it's about reclaiming space. Taking up the room you were once told you didn't belong in. Some ghosts don't need to be banished, they just need to see you standing there, unbothered and unafraid. Steve once told me, "You're too intense to lead." He said it like it was a diagnosis. Like my ambition and focus were some kind of flaw he had to manage. I used to say that intensity. I'd water it down in meetings, soften my voice, make sure I never asked too many questions in one sitting. But that same intensity, it's what built a multi-million-dollar platform. It's what convinced investors, brought in clients, and pulled top-tier engineers away from bigger brands. Funny how that works. Now, when people tell me I'm intense, I just smile and say, good. I've never seen myself as a hero. I'm not the underdog who played nice and got a lucky break. I made hard choices. I had to say no when it would have been easier to say yes. I let people go who weren't aligned, even when I liked them personally. I pushed deadlines. I demanded clarity. I walked away from deals that felt off. And when Brightwave offered us that first meeting, I didn't hesitate. I studied the contract, found the cracks, and negotiated terms that gave me full operational control within the first 90 days. I knew exactly what I was doing and why. Does that make me ruthless? Maybe, but not cruel, not reckless, just clear. Not everyone from Brightwave stayed. Some left on their own. Some weren't offered roles. A few sent me emails afterward. Some kind, some bitter. One said, "You've changed." Maybe, but more likely, I've just stopped hiding the parts that made them uncomfortable. I don't show up to be palatable. I show up to build, to lead, to deliver. And that doesn't always look like what people expect. Especially not from a woman in her late 20s who got written off for not being likable enough. But I'm not interested in being liked. I'm interested in being effective. Lena and I sometimes joke about writing a book. How to Get Fired and Buy the Company. Catchy, right? But I don't know if I'd write it yet. I'm still in it. Still building. Still learning. Still evolving. The story isn't over. Not even close. But what I do know is this: success doesn't need to be loud. It doesn't need to be announced with confetti and revenge speeches. Sometimes it's quiet walking into a room and knowing you belong. Sitting at the head of the table and not needing to prove anything to anyone. That's the kind of power I've come to value. Not performative, not petty, just earned. And no one can take that away from me. Hi ChatGPT. It's July 2024 now. TaskMint just closed a $6 million Series A round. We've grown to 42 employees, 70% of them women. Many of them women of color, and not one of them has ever been told to smile more in a meeting. That rule's not in our handbook. But it's written in the culture, in the way we lead, the way we listen, and the way we build. You don't have to contort yourself into someone else's version of likable here. You don't have to be smaller, softer, or more palatable to be respected. You just have to show up as you are and do the work. That's it. It sounds simple, but in so many offices I've worked in, it wasn't. I think about that a lot, how many good people get sidelined not because they lack talent or drive, but because they make someone insecure. Too direct, too opinionated, too quiet, too smart, too ambitious, too everything. I used to carry that feedback like a weight. Now I see it for what it was. Projection. And I've made it my mission to make sure TaskMint doesn't become another place that confuses conformity with excellence. We hire slow and lead with intent. Our team knows they don't have to sacrifice their identity for their paycheck. It's not perfect, no company is, but it's intentional. And that makes a world of difference. I don't gloat. Truly, there's no point. Most of the people who dismissed me at Brightwave are either long gone or forgotten. Steve didn't even show up to his exit meeting. HR handled it all remotely. And when the acquisition paperwork went through, the name change happened within 2 weeks. The Brightwave logo came down. The TaskMint badge went up. And that was that. There was no fireworks moment, no dramatic showdown. Just a quiet transition. And a very official, legally binding wire transfer for $2.3 million. I didn't need flames or fury. I didn't even need an apology. I just needed time, and a chance to do what I knew I could. Sometimes people ask if I ever think about going back to that exact moment, February 2022. Standing in that glass-walled conference room with HR and Steve, being told I wasn't the right cultural fit. Would I change anything? Honestly, no. That meeting felt like an ending at the time, but it was the beginning. The push I didn't know I needed. Because if they hadn't fired me, I never would have started TaskMint. I never would have found the right people, the right investors, the right rhythm. I might still be there now, trying to prove myself to people who had already made up their minds. Instead, I get to build something better, something bigger than me. I get to look around a room full of sharp, curious, passionate people, and know that they're here because of a vision I refuse to let go of. That matters more than the money. More than the headlines. It's legacy. It's proof that the way we've been taught to lead isn't the only way. And maybe, just maybe, the next Jenna won't have to learn that the hard way. So no, the last laugh isn't a smile. It's not a clapback or a mic drop or a smug one-liner. It's steady. It's patient. It's sustainable. It looks like signing off on payroll and knowing your team is paid well and treated fairly. It looks like walking into a meeting and being heard the first time you speak. It looks like finally exhaling after years of holding your breath. And with that, I'll leave you here. Thanks for listening. This was the Karma Files. Until next time, stay focused, stay fierce, and never let them dim your power.